Hello everyone. Today, I will recap the movie Luca. Sea monster, Luca, when on land, will transform into a human form. Although it looks very scary, its soul is very innocent. But it are not as fierce as people think, but are actually very gentle and kind. Please follow the recap of this movie. In a small town on the coast of Italy, there were two fishermen, Giacomo and Tommaso, who often went fishing at night. One night, while they were fishing, Giacomo told Tommaso about a sea monster, but Tommaso did not believe it. After that, they turned on music and relaxed together. While fishing, suddenly a strange hand appeared and tried to take their things. Finally, Giacomo saw the real sea monster. It was caught in the fishing net, but when Giacomo and Tommaso tried to pull the net up, the net broke. Suddenly, the sea monster jumped over their boat, scaring them. Giacomo threw the knife down, but the monster managed to escape. At this time, at the bottom of the ocean, Luca, a sea monster, lived with his parents and grandmother. His daily job was to help his family herd the fish. That day, Luca caused his fish to get lost. If he didn't find them soon, his parents would scold him. When Luca go meet to his grandmother, he found a fish biting her hair. Finally, Luca found enough fish, but in his heart, he had a big dream, to learn about the human world. However, just like on land, creatures in the ocean also consider humans as monsters, and forbid them from contact with humans. Therefore, Luca could only use his time hurrying the fish to pick up human items that had fallen into the sea. That day, Luca found an alarm clock. He wanted to touch it but was afraid. In the end, he decided to pick it up to see. When the clock rang, it startled him. Just then, a boat suddenly passed by, making Luca very scared and quickly hiding. In order not to be discovered by his parents, he decided to hide the item he found in a cave. One day, while searching for the item, Luca accidentally discovered a gramophone. As he approached, a person wearing a diving suit suddenly appeared, causing Luca to run into a rock in fear to escape. Fortunately, that was not a human, but a fellow of Luca's species, named Alberto. After picking up the item, Alberto began swimming to a nearby island. Curious, Luca followed and witnessed Alberto jumping out of the water. When he saw Luca's reaction, Alberto pulled him up ashore. Luca immediately transformed into a human form and screamed in panic. But when he looked around, he saw grass, trees, clouds, and birds. He found this place beautiful and fresh. However, Luca still remembered his mother's words to be obedient and listen, so he returned to the ocean. That day, Luca couldn't sleep because he kept thinking about the world on land that he had seen. It was really wonderful. He intended to ask his grandma about it, but she was fast asleep. The next morning, Luca decided to create shape the rock into his own image to watch over the fish, then swam back to the island he had visited the day before, trying to muster up the courage to surface. However, he still did not dare. At that time, Alberto appeared, naturally climbed ashore, and transformed into a human. Seeing this, Luca decided to risk surfacing. At that time, his fins, tail and scales disappeared, and he had a new pair of legs. However, he still felt like he had a tail behind him. Luca tried to step walk but failed. Alberto guided him on how to walk, and advised him not to think of himself as a fish. After going through many practices, Luca was finally able to walk. Alberto also took Luca to his shelter, an old tower, where he used to live with his father. The tower was filled with human objects that they had collected. Alberto then began to introduce Luca to humans. They could fall from high places, there were clouds, the sun, and the birds fly. When returning to Alberto's house, Luca saw the music player. He curiously touched it, causing it to make a happy sound. Then, Luca were drawn to a poster of a Vespa. Alberto said that it was the greatest invention of mankind, which could take them anywhere they wanted. Luca heard this and started imagining himself riding it around the ocean. Alberto then asked him if he wanted to help him build it. At first, Luca wanted to refuse, because it was time for him to go home. However, his passion made him stay. They decided to use the items they found under the sea to build the vehicle of their dreams. After many hours of work, they successfully assembled a beautiful Vespa. However, Luca needed to go home immediately. In the end, he came home late. His mother angrily asked where he had been all day. Before he gave his answer, his father was surprised to see that his legs still had human shape. At this time, Luca's grandmother came and told that she had sent Luca to find sea cucumbers, so the matter was over. The next morning, Luca and Alberto met on the small island and decided to test their Vespa. Luca was a bit nervous, so he took over holding a wooden plank as a launch pad, while Alberto launched the vehicle down the hill. However, the vehicle did not last long then broken into pieces. Alberto could not stop and plunged into the sea with the Vespa. Although the first Vespa failed, the two were not discouraged and decided to start working on the second one. Alberto also found human clothes to give to Luca, which made him very happy. After that, an experiment the car knew began. However, halfway through, the vehicle broke down and Alberto was hit by a bird. Despite the difficulties, the two were determined to try harder. They rebuilt another car and together they let it slide down the ramp. Then they sped down the launch pad. The car flew up into the sky, and they admired the flock of birds flying and the beautiful blue sky. However, the car also fell down, and below was a large rock. Luckily, Alberto quickly split the car into two, saving both of them from danger. Meanwhile, Luca's parents noticed that their son was behaving strangely, so they followed him. They discovered a big secret. Every day Luca goes ashore to play. At this time, both Luca and Alberto learned to talk from humans and often repeated what they heard. That night, while they lying down and looking at the stars, Luca confided that this was the life he really dreamed of. He looked out at the distant town and wished that one day he could ride his Vespa with Alberto through the flower fields. In his dream, Luca would drive across the high bridge and fly up into the sky with Alberto. The stars were glowing fish. When Luca touched the largest fish, it suddenly melted into water, causing Luca to return to his sea monster form and fall to the bottom of the dark sea. As Luca woke up, he realized it was midnight and ran home in a panic. When he arrived, he found his parents waiting for him. They had discovered the human objects he had collected. Luca tried to explain to them that the world above was not as dangerous as they thought, and that the ground was beautiful. However, this only made them angrier. In the end, they decided to send Luca to live with his uncle, Hugo, a strange man with transparent skin that could see his internal organs, who lived in the deepest part of the sea. Hugo told Luca that while living there would be no need to do anything, no light, and they just had to lie there and wait for rotten fish to fall to eat. While Hugo was engrossed in his story, the power suddenly went out. Feeling scared, Luca sneaked ashore and told Alberto everything. After hearing this, Alberto decided to help Luca escape to the town to find a way to get his own Vespa. Alberto and Luca agreed and swam to shore together. Alberto held Luca's hand and jumped over a rock, then they swam happily. When they jumped out of the water, they even transformed into human form. This was the first time Luca felt so happy, and finally the two of them were close to the town. Suddenly a ship passed by, forcing Alberto and Luca to quickly dive into the sea. In a difficult situation, they found a sunken boat to enter the town without being detected. When passing some fishermen, Luca saw the hook and fish in their hands, making him panic and want to turn back, but Alberto calmed him down. As they got deeper into the town, Luca noticed that the place was very crowded, people were happy and peaceful. The sun was shining everywhere. When they saw two old women coming, they used sayings they had learned from the fishermen, and came to say hello. "What's wrong with she, idiot?" As a result, Luca and Alberto got hit on the head, but they were quickly comforted with two delicious ice creams. At this time, Luca saw countless images of fishing, making him feel scared and wanting to leave this place with Alberto. At that time, they saw a man named Ercole riding a Vespa, and decided to ask for one. However, a group of children playing soccer came up and asked them to play with him. Luca happily agreed, but unfortunately kicked Ercole's Vespa. Annoyed by the fall, the children realized that Luca and Alberto were from another place, and started bullying him. They tried to push Luca's head into a fountain. When Luca was about to reveal his true form, a girl appeared. Giulia intervened, saved Luca from the dangerous situation and took him and Alberto to safety on her bike. Giulia said that she hated Ercole because he was arrogant and often mocked her for losing the local triathlon. When they learned that the grand prize was cash, Luca and Alberto wanted to win so they could buy a Vespa and fulfill their dreams. Luca convinced Giulia to let him, and Alberto joined the team. Giulia thought for a moment and then agreed. First, they needed to do some tests to divide the competition roles. Because Luca and Alberto can't let themselves get wet, they decided to pretend they couldn't swim. So Giulia let Luca compete in the cycling competition, while Alberto would compete in the eating competition. However, before Luca had never been exposed to a bicycle, so when he started pedaling, he kept falling to the ground. Giulia advised him to look ahead, because looking down would make him fall. After a while, Luca learned to control the steering wheel better. When they encountered a difficult section of terrain, Luca jumped over the board, but luckily he didn't fall into the water. Then, Giulia decided to take Luca and Alberto to her house. She lived with her father Massimo, a fisherman who had lost an arm hunting sea monsters. Giulia told him to act like normal. She also showed Luca and Alberto the newspaper, which said that people believed in the existence of sea monsters. Suddenly Massimo took a knife and stuck it into the wall. Luca was scared and sprayed water on Alberto's face, accidentally causing Alberto to reveal his true form. Luckily, no one saw, but unfortunately, the house cat found out. Dinner was ready, and for the first time, Luca and Alberto enjoyed pasta, which was really delicious. Then, Massimo asked them what they were doing in this town. Giulia answered for them, saying that they were coming to participate in the upcoming race. Giulia asked her father for some money to register for the race, but Massimo said that work had not been going well recently, so he couldn't give her money. Hearing this, Luca and Alberto offered to help Massimo because they knew a lot about fish. At this moment, the cat jumped on Luca's face and scratched because of the smell of fish. Giulia just thought that the cat was being mischievous. To apologize, Giulia invites Luca and Alberto to stay at her house. However, they did not know that Luca's parents had also come ashore to search for him. Luca's mother warned her husband to be cautious of humans. Suddenly, she spotted a real person and was shocked to discover it was her husband. They were both horrified to realize that they had transformed into human beings. The next morning, Luca woke up and felt the warm air by the sea. However, he felt something was wrong. He realized that he and Alberto had been exposed by the fog. Luca woke Alberto up, and the two quickly tried to return to human form, but were seen by the cat. Massimo told Giulia to go deliver the fish, while Luca and Alberto followed him to the sea to fish. However, Massimo had been fishing all day, but had only caught a few small fish. A moment later, Luca told Massimo that this area was a haunted fish graveyard, so the fish always avoided it. Alberto then showed Massimo where the fish usually gathered. Massimo listened, and that day, he had a big catch. On this side, Luca's parents had come to town, and they even stole human clothes to disguise themselves to start their plan to find their son. When they saw a boy sitting and eating ice cream, Luca's father thought it was Luca and went to meet him, saying that he wouldn't be able to escape because he was his son. After saying that, he pushed the boy into the river, making him cry loudly. They immediately realized that it was reckless, so they ran away before his mother arrived. Luca's parents saw that there were many children here. That time, Luca passed by his parents but didn't recognize them. Afterwards, Luca, Alberto, and Giulia took the money and ran to the competition registration place. Unexpectedly, Ercole also came to register, even though he was too old to participate. Ercole arrogantly stole their money. Alberto was angry and wanted to fight Ercole, but Giulia stopped him. At this time, Ercole had the idea of defaming them in the race, so he returned the money to Luca. When returning, Luca, Alberto, and Giulia started practicing hard. While Luca was cycling, Ercole came to mock him again. Luca was angry and said that he was not inferior to anyone, but unfortunately, when going downhill, an accident happened. The car was in one place, the person was in another. While Giulia was practicing swimming, Ercole's group drove the motorboat into Luca's boat, splashing water on Alberto, causing him to turn into sea monster. Luca quickly covered Alberto, but accidentally pushed Alberto into the water. Luckily, no one noticed. On this side, Luca's parents thought of a way to find their son. They played soccer with the children, intentionally letting them fall into the water, but none of them was Luca. At that time, Luca heard his mother's voice. He was scared and rushed into the house to escape. At night, Massimo needed help, so Alberto came to help. Luca and Giulia sat and talked. She told Luca about the stars in the sky, which he had previously thought were anchovies. Giulia takes Luca to see the neighbor's telescope. Luca feels like he is running on the rings of Saturn, exploring the universe with Giulia. Noticing that Luca loves her astronomy book, Giulia decides to get it to him. Alberto sees everything and is a little jealous, so he asks Luca to go for a walk. As they walk, they see a Vespa, but Luca changes his mind and realizes that school is much more interesting than the car Vespa. Alberto reminds Luca that they are sea monsters, and if they are discovered, humans will catch them. As the competition day approaches, Luca has been practicing hard on his bike, which makes the town's kids very excited. At the same time, Alberto also learns the skill of eating pasta from Giulia's father Massimo. 2 days before the competition, Luca takes Alberto and Giulia around town on his bike. When passing through the square, Luca sees his parents, and they also spot him and chase after him. However, Luca ran up the hill to hide. There, Luca saw a train on the way to Giulia's school. and said that he wanted to go to school too. Alberto got upset, interrupted him, and drove Luca down the hill at a fast speed. Eventually, they collided with a pedestrian, and they fell into the sea, revealing their true form as sea monsters. After reaching the shore, Luca was very angry and fought with Alberto. Giulia ran to stop the two and promised to help them go to school. Luca was happy about that, but Alberto doesn't want to leave Luca, so he jumped into the sea to return to his form. To protect himself, Luca called Alberto a sea monster. Unfortunately, Ercole was also nearby and threw a spear at Alberto. Alberto was very disappointed and left alone. Giulia and Luca returned home. Giulia was suspicious, so she splashed water on Luca and found out that he was also a sea monster. However, she was not afraid, just advised Luca to return to the ocean, because this town often hunted sea monsters. Luca sadly leaves. He returned to the island to look for Alberto. When they meet again, Luca realizes that he has hurt Alberto, so he apologizes, but does not receive forgiveness. Luca declares that he will win the contest to buy a Vespa, fulfilling his promise to Alberto. The day of the competition arrived. Giulia planned to compete alone, but Luca appeared. The first part of the competition was swimming. In order to avoid being recognized, Luca wore Alberto's diving suit. Meanwhile, Ercole was cheating by pouring olive oil on his teammate to help him swim faster. Unexpectedly, this attracted fish to bite him. After a while, Luca left the water, but his diving suit was soaked, causing him to turn into a fish. When it came to the noodle eating competition, Giulia won again. When it came to the final challenge, Ercole saw that Giulia was ahead, so he decided to cheat, breaking the rules to go faster. Luca quickly jumped on his bike and sped away. Meanwhile, Luca met his parents and apologized for not being able to stop immediately. The people around were surprised to see Luca running so fast. Before long, Luca took the lead in the cycling race. Luca did very well, but unfortunately, it started to rain. To avoid getting wet, he had to find shelter under the awning. While he was confused about what to do, then from a distance, Alberto held an umbrella and ran to help him. The friendship between Alberto and Luca had always been strong, but suddenly Ercole played dirty and kicked down Alberto, revealing Alberto's sea monster form to everyone, scaring everyone. Everyone began to chase Alberto. Despite being wet, Luca still decided to cycle to save Alberto. Then Alberto and Luca ran down the hill, while Ercole chased after them with a spear. Giulia also saw and ran after them. Luca and Alberto just wanted to live peacefully as humans without hurting anyone, but that was impossible. Ercole kept chasing them, and Giulia bravely sacrificed herself, crashing into Ercole's car to save Luca and Alberto. When Luca and Alberto returned safely, they could not bear to leave Giulia, who had fallen. They rushed to help Giulia. However, the townspeople had already surrounded them. At this time, Ercole and the fishermen with spears approached them. Giulia also bravely stood up to protect Luca and Alberto. Ercole, a shameless man, wants to capture Luca and Alberto to receive the reward. At this time, Giulia's father, Massimo, stepped forward and announced that Luca's team had won. It turned out that he had known that Luca and Alberto were sea monster for a long time. Luca and Alberto threw Ercole into the fountain together. At this time, Luca's parents also ran over. They were worried and hugged their son. The organizers brought the championship trophy and revealed that this town was also inhabited by many sea monster. The posters for hunting sea monster were torn down. The fishermen no longer considered them monsters. The group of friends Giulia, Luca, and Alberto danced happily. Afterwards, they used the prize money to buy a Vespa and rode around town together to celebrate their victory. Massimo also invited everyone to his house for dinner. Luca's parents finally changed their minds about human. They had a warm and happy night. However, the joy did not last long. The next morning, Giulia had to leave home to go to school. She hugged her two good friends, Luca and Alberto, goodbye. Luca also gave up on his dream of going to school. Alberto suddenly gave Luca a ticket. It turned out that Alberto had sold his car to make Luca's dream come true, that is to go to school. When he returned, Luca saw that his parents, although a little worried, had agreed to let Luca go to school. However, he had to promise to write to his family every week. Luca wanted Alberto to go with him, but Alberto refused and said he would stay with Massimo. The two hugged goodbye, and Alberto gave Luca a drawing of their favorite Vespa. Luca was moved and cried as he said goodbye to everyone.